yeah, the transition that we're making as we move to everyone working from home. And it's harder to do, I think, in a way. But thank you for putting the effort into to put this up. What are the top issues from a data security perspective? The problem is how to pick what are the top 3 out of many, right? I think based on following the conversations that we've had today so far from John Ruffalo's kickoff and that, I think on the tone of this conference, I think the changing threat landscape is probably the key topic, and or one of them. You know, I've learned from a long time ago from other smart people that you know, cybersecurity risk is a function of 3 things: the asset value, which is usually attributed to the business process that the systems and the data support. Then the threats, and it used to be it was pretty hard to figure out what your threats were, but I think we're getting a better handle on that over time. And then the vulnerabilities, which is either the inherent vulnerability of the business model or the strength and weakness of the controls and measures that you've got. So to some degree, our assets really haven't changed, you know, as we've gone home with the COVID pandemic, but their location has. And our sort of work that we did at BlackBerry when we had to all go home is we'd started to have a business plan to improve our information security posture. And that allowed us to actually pivot and said, okay, what's changed? And what has changed is we've gone home. And so tactically, now the threat actors, if you consider that you have serious threat actors like organized crime or state-sponsored, or even the opportunistic hackers, the work location's changed. You know, the laptop I'm on right now, for example, is in a home location. From a corporate perspective, you've got to treat that home location as foreign and hostile and not well managed. So that's changed the threat, the sort of the threat model. The hackers also know that everyone's working from home, not only high profile executives, but the system administrators, you name it. So if they're targeting your organization, they now have in effect, a wider or a bigger and maybe a bit more soft attack surface to have a run at. So we sort of figured that out a bit. We're not perfect, obviously, and to say so would be idiotic, but we said, okay, we're going to start monitoring traffic that's coming through the VPN and from the home locations. We put some extra controls into our VPN. So that's changed. I think the other topic is, you know, the threat actors and how that changes with organized crime and state-sponsored in the current world, as John said, about the deglobalization. And part of that or related to that is if you're a business of any significance and you've got any intellectual property or anything of significant value, you've actually got to confront the probability and think it through as to whether or not state-sponsored and organized crime are targeting you. And to not do that is naive. And if you're a steward of a public company or your own company, it's irresponsible. So those are the big drivers of the issues, Bashir, I think. That breaks down into many tactical, urgent and maybe not so urgent issues to deal with. But whatever security deficit that you had before now is going to get exploited in this new environment. The other thing that came up, I think, was interesting is, you know, with the deglobalization, there is still not only the supply chain, but the associated or core information supply chain. So, you know, the organized attackers could not just say, take a run directly at your network from the outside. They may be placing compromises, hardware or software, into your computing systems and then shipping them to you. Just like you and I discussed sometimes back about payment systems, yes, right? Instead of attacking a retail store's checkout lanes, if we attack and compromise the payment hardware software modules, right, then that's just way better. Yes. So these are, I think, the issues from my perspective.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. Patrick, since we can see you on the
Thanks, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Bashir. A great event so far. It's like drinking out of a fire hose. So many ideas are being shared and are really relevant to what we're going through. And it's a good thing that we're adding to this list, because I'm not going to repeat. I'm going to build on what Chris said, because there's additional points and it's difficult to address all of them.
Right.
I would say I would add another layer to the what I hopefully will coin the bring your own location, right? So we talked about bring your own device. Now it's bring your own location and all the complexities related to that. The layer I would add is identity and access management. Okay, so yes, you're vulnerable. There's been waves of phishing attacks based on, you know, COVID vaccines and whatnot. Now the waves we're seeing are people trying to, with either robots or directly, accessing the remote office or branch office or remote location access ramp to the business, right? Because, you know, if you're like a company that has 3 branch offices and a head office, you're securing 4 locations. Now all of a sudden with 200 employees, you have 200 locations, as Chris mentioned. But then how do you make sure, number one, that the proper access is given to these remote workers, that they say that you could guarantee on who they are, that you could onboard their credentials and offboard their credentials, right? You know, add the complexity of cloud and cloud management. You know, we're instantiating a lot of workloads in the cloud. Well, there's a sysadmin, there's someone operating those instances. Well, who controls who this person has access to, and what happens when this person leaves? Could this person delete all my AWS resources? The answer is yes, right? So identity and access management is critical. The other aspects, and Carol mentioned it earlier, AI. How are we going to ensure privacy and security when AIs are basing decisions on the information they have about us? What will our rights look like to manage that process, right? And from a security perspective. And I could build on that further, and it'll relate to the conversation we may have later on. We will have it about Bill 64 in Quebec.
Yes.
Is what keeps me at night is not the bill itself. I'm actually very happy because I've been waiting for this for almost 20 years, being in the security business that long. It's how are companies gonna deal with this after the fact? You know, it's one thing to put legislation in place, and we'll get into that later, but how will companies, and what systems, processes, and people will they need to get the job done? Because legislation is one thing, right? I mean, you could put a law, and Chris, in our prelude to preparing all this, we talked about, you know, the analogies of cars, right? There's a reason why there are speed limits, legislation, laws, because some people, you know, pass the limits. But you could have all the laws you want. If you don't have police officers and radars, it's all worthless, right? So what keeps me at night is after legislation. How are we going to help businesses put these things into place? Because you know what? There's already lobbying here in Quebec of businesses, because it's a proposed legislation, so it's not there yet, but they're going to want to tune this down because it is GDPR like in a big way, and actually there's a few things in there that are even go take it a step further. So those are the other issues that concern me these days.
Fantastic. You made a couple of points. We'll come back to Kat.
Sure. So I love what the gentlemen have covered already with security and access. What I want to touch on, I think that keeps me up at night, is the quantity of data that's being collected. So I always look at it like money. If you had a $10 bill or even $100, you can keep that in your wallet. If you had $100,000, you're not going to keep that in a wallet. You're going to look for somewhere more secure to keep that. And if you had $100 million, you're looking for even more security. So the quantity of data that we're collecting is very much related to the type of security we have to have. And I know we're going to get into a little more of the data, but less is more here. So if there's data you're collecting that's either highly sensitive or unnecessary to your legal basis for your company, you are just creating more security issues with that data security.
That's actually fantastic. And I think we're going to go to the other part because I think the culture, again, siloed thing we talked about earlier, and not just the silos are creating a major problem, but even when we talk about the laws and compliance standards, the PCI can talk quite a lot about it, but That's not what the issue is. That these are all minimum standards. These are not maximum standards. And the problem is the culture we are in is to tick boxes off and do as little as possible. I mean, Patrick, you hear about, let me do scope reduction, because nobody wants the whole thing to be reviewed, right? Because they want to get the piece of paper and do as little as possible to meet what is already a minimum standard, right? I mean,
it creates blind spots.
Absolutely. So the question is now, from that standpoint, we were looking at that, and data has been a problem. Plus, what we talked earlier is that we now see a report that says 80% of the compromises happen in organizations whose privacy policies were very weak. The practices were very weak. So why don't you take that, talk about the data, and especially we can even go to the compromises that happen in with Desjardins and in fact the Bill 64. Then we can bring it back to the other part.
So okay, so to build actually on what Kat just said, yeah. Quantity of data.
Right. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
We had access to a few studies that were made, and north of 50% of enterprise data has not been accessed in the last 2 years. So talk about quantity of data, and we know it's exponential. And it's like, number one, it's costly for the business, because guess what? The data in those studies was on tier 1 storage. So flash arrays, very expensive storage. So number one, there's an effect on the bottom line. Number two, risk of litigation, risks if you get hacked, risks in terms of the wrong manipulation of your data,
right?
Availability. So there's a cascading effect that goes beyond even security, right? So that's a critical element. And what PIPEDA doesn't do, and what laws, the Bill 64 looks at in GDPR, is it puts a framework for deleting data, right? And we've walked in very large organizations that are regulated, by the way. And when you ask around and you say, who has the ability to press on the delete button in an organization? Everyone looks at themselves and they're saying, it's not me, it's my privacy officer, it's legal counsel, no, it's the owner of the data. We have to make sense of what's happening and who has it's one thing to put it in place, but who will have the responsibility to delete that data? And it is a big responsibility, because if you delete something you're not supposed to because of legislation reasons or data retention laws, you're in deep trouble. And if you delete it because your business needs it, you could be also in deep trouble. You could be deleting, plans and recipes and formulas in the pharmaceutical industries or construction industries. So it is a complex question.
Chris, you want to add to that?
I'll put I am, as you guys know, or some of you know, I am a refugee accountant. So I'll put my accountant hat on. And this is all about inventory management at the beginning. And I've seen this in my professional audit and consulting career, as well as my industry work at Rogers and at BlackBerry. Exactly what data we have and where is it, as Kat's saying, is does someone have a list? Well, the answer is no. And if we do, then guess what? People have also copied it. And the end user computing was great for enabling business, but what end user computing did is basically said, instead of saying, I know I've got a mainframe in the basement and I can go and find you the data because that's the only storage we got, like back, a long time ago. Now data's everywhere, as Patrick said, and storage is cheap. And reusing data. So it's not like you can say, here's my customer list in the CRM system. That then also exists in like 35 spreadsheets in your company and a data lake somewhere and etc. So the inventorying of it, to even go and do what Kat's saying and Patrick's saying, to get rid of the stuff that you don't need, get rid of secondary copies. That doesn't even mean that you're doing what Patrick says to get rid of the data. You're just reducing the instances of it that are open to attack, compromise, or error. And so it's a very boring thing to do, though, saying I'm going to start doing asset management, hardware, software, data flows. It's one of the most unrewarding and unglamorous parts of IT management, information management, or security management. But, just as tongue in cheek, Ozzy Osbourne had it right. Sharon, where's my glasses? If Ozzy can't find his glasses, do you think he can find all the data that he's looking for? No, right? So it's one of those unrewarding things that I think needs effort, because once it's found, then at least people can either get rid of it or deduplicate it, and then you've shrunk the problem, whether it's an IT problem, a cost problem, or a security problem.
Kat, you started it.
I started it. I'll finish
good point,
it.
Though. Very good point.
So I think part of the thing with deletion is when we talk about the right to be forgotten, which is in GDPR and coming up in Bill 64, and CCPA has it in California, and hopefully we'll have it in PEPIDA one day. When we talk about that, there's a whole bunch of parameters around it. And one of those things is there's legal reasons to keep data. So, I mean, Chris probably knows better from an accounting perspective, right? There's legal reasons to keep accounting data, and there's legal reasons to keep employment data. So you can't just say, remove me from your system if there is a legal basis to keep the data. But in terms of removal, assuming you can find all the data and you know where it is, removing data is not a delete key. And so I know people who like to dumpster dive outside tech communities and pull their drives just to see how much data they can pull off the drives. And it is amazing to see how much data is left over. If you're physically removing data, you need a magnet. Like, you can't just unplug a drive and throw it in the dumpster behind your company. So we're having other issues that we don't see in the news as often, but people aren't properly deleting the data. And backups, as Chris had said, where are these backups? And Patrick said the same thing. Where are the backups? Where are they being kept? Did we forget one on a server and that we used to use that we didn't use anymore? And so, yes, the first step is certainly to list the data. But even when you have it, deletion is not as simple as a magical button.
You reminded me, obviously we won't take any company names here, but in one organization, they had, the data enters their system, obviously in one place. So it did. Rather than do programming that would only give whatever relevant information required for fulfillment or whatever, they were replicating that entire database with the credit card number and all that to 229 different places. So when you take out one at source here, guess what? You're not going to deal. So you highlighted a very important problem here, is that it's sitting elsewhere. And then you don't know if you gave it to third party because of marketing reasons or for branding, loyalty cards, whatever. What did you give them? Did they need to know my credit card? No. And so that is another problem. Like, a lot of the merchants store the information, although they don't need it. That's why we need it for chargeback. They don't need it, because you don't start the chargeback, the customer does. And they got the credit card and they got the information. So that was the other part of it. So with that, how would you go about, because we know that it's difficult to know where it is. So how do you go about trying to find and then trying to eliminate it? It's not an overnight process, obviously. But one good thing is the credit cards do expire every 3 months. Every 3 years. And the CVV and all the values change because they're tied to expiry date, and the algorithms do a few things there. So you don't have to protect it and go back, 20 years. But the problem is with the date of birth, with the PIN numbers, and where people don't change, right? So, Chris, what would you do? Because we've done a lot of this. The reason I'm going there, you've seen, yeah?
Yeah, I would abstract it away from just the card data world, but the point is, the point is well made. When I've looked at problems like this in the past, I'd attack it a number of ways at the same time. One is, top down, sort of a top-down analysis, and we talked about this as we planned for this. Some very boring, old-fashioned, and I'm going to date myself, but top-down structured analysis. Jordan was the master of this back when I was young in the 70s and 80s learning about this, but a top-down analysis of the business and the functions or the mega processors and the main data stores and application systems is a start for the inventory, right? And then from there you can ask questions and say, so what else do you have, and what's on the sidebar, and what's on the corner of the desk conceptually and physically, and etc. And you start to build the list. And so that's a process of discovery, and you have to let go of the fact that you won't be perfect. And then bottom up, you can get tools that just run around your network and enumerate data. So, attack it from both sides, top down and bottom up, and you get discovery and maybe some surprises, and gee whiz, look at that, and all that in that process. And then the next sort of step is triage the problem. So here's stuff that we really need. As Kat said, we actually do need certain employment data in the HR system. That's fine. Got it. Fine. Cool. And certain accounting data in the accounting systems. Got it. And then on the other side of the triage problem is we don't need this junk. Send out a sort of an amnesty or an alert and tell people, we're going to get rid of this stuff because, as Patrick said, no one's accessed it for ages, and it's old, it's got dust on it, etc. It's an EBIZTEK, to date myself, right? We don't need it. And then you get the stuff in the middle that you probably need to spend time arguing, debating, working with. But at least you've now broken down the problem a bit, and you've got a way to get started.
Agreed, Chris. And I'll build on what you just said. The challenge sometimes is who has the responsibility in the organization to ask those questions and make line of business accountable to take those actions, or at least share information, especially in the context where you have segregation of duty. In some cases, you got to bring 4 different departments in the room and ask those questions because information is in silos in a lot of organizations. It protects organizations sometimes, but also creates multiple problems. And if I could tie this into Bill 64, Bill 64 has a provision that says that companies will have to name a chief privacy officer and a chief data officer, regardless of their size, and put their names on the website. As far as I'm concerned, I went to, there's a gentleman years ago, I was part of a group of executives called the Tech group, which is now called BIZTEK. And one of the speakers taught me one thing. He said, what gets measured gets done. So the moment you have names and accountability out there, stuff is going to happen. Now it's a proposed legislation. So Bill 64 is essentially, so Quebec was a precursor of the privacy laws in Canada. In 1993, they came out with their first privacy law. But then I'm from Montreal, by the way, Quebec, so I say we were laggards versus the rest of Canada for all the years past that. But now there's a lot of pressure being put by the Europeans that deal with a lot of companies in Canada to comply to GDPR, because we were audited, I think, in 2014, and we were told, you guys have to comply, there's going to be penalties for your... So we kind of have like the benefit of the doubt from the Europeans to adopt legislation to catch up to GDPR and simplify things. So Quebec is proposing this law, which has severe, and I saw it, severe penalties. I'm not going to go over all the details, just the highlights. It is public, and I could share links, for those who need it. There are provisions to even have artificial intelligence tools disclose how our information comes into play in an automated decision process, right? It even has provisions for that. It has provisions to manage the deletion of data as well. There's a whole slew of elements that align to GDPR, in some cases go even further than GDPR. A lot of highlights there. It talks about processors as well and their relation to customers' information. And it puts, like Derek said earlier, with this, we have like one master now, and that master is us. It's the people that come into play with their personal information. And all companies are subject to that. Now, if you look at the cost, if you look at, I already have visibility on what this could look like. There's going to be a lot of work to get this done. There's still, there's going to be lobbying to see if they could tone it down, most probably. We're talking with firms, lawyer firms and lobbyists, and they're saying that companies are they're after they're after the legislators to see, you know, to tone this down. But I think the spirit of there is there, and the right to be forgotten is also in that proposed law, which is great. So a lot of work is going to come out of that. I think it's a step in the right direction, because up until this point, nothing, you know, and I, like Anne said, at one point, you know, I've been doing security for 20 years. I was almost to the point of giving up, you know, and it's like, and people are not helping, because when you publish your personal information on platforms like Facebook for everyone to see, the general population, although privacy is a concern, a lot of people are not acting in that direction, right? When you post when you're on vacation, when you post your birth date, your address, and all that, you're not helping, right? But for those cases, we need to put legislation in place to still manage the process, right? As we do in all other walks of life. And I'll close this section, this comment on the following. You remember Sarbanes-Oxley, right? There were billions of dollars spent to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley. Why was it put in place? Because of fraud. But we understand financial fraud, right? We understand that there's dollars and cents involved and people getting bankrupt and whatnot. I think our challenge has been in our industry, the fact that we haven't put faces, well, there are faces to victims, right? But it's ramping up so quickly now, and the damages are being, you know, communicated by the media every day. It's helping the cause, but it's too late for a lot of people. The moment people realize that the impact of IT fraud, hacking, even human error on our systems, the moment you realize how concrete that is, you know, up until you get, you know, your identity stolen, that's when I think legislation, the legislator has to move, has to act like they did with Sarbanes-Oxley. You know, we have to make this more relatable to people.
So this is very interesting and relates to something about the culture, about the fact that we are feeling so comfortable many times that we think we've got things under control. Let's talk about cyber insurance, right? Is that giving us false sense of security? Are we doing it properly? Are they doing it properly? You know, Chris, you want to go for it first? Or whatever.
Interesting topic. Like, to me, cyber insurance is an important part of your overall information security management system or program. It, you know, it will help pay for some of the consequences and damage caused to your company and to to your customers or others that are impacted by a breach. I think the cyber insurance industry or sub-industry is catching up. And by what I mean by that, Bashir, and we talked about this a bit as we planned the conference, is I am seeing better questions from the underwriters, but understand what I mean. What I'm also saying by saying that is, in the past, maybe in the early and maybe recent time, the questions asked by underwriters as they accept, you know, the insurance contract and figure out a premium for amount of coverage, were not that probing. And to some degree, the people asking the questions did not necessarily understand the questions they were asking or the answers that they were getting. And so this part of the insurance industry will mature like others as they end up paying for what they call in the insurance industry, you know, catastrophic events. Once they actually get hit with some really big claims that they have to pay out, even if they go to court for years to stop paying it, then that will cause them to get, you know, to hire people like us, not to be arrogant, but to hire people that actually have got Patrick's 20 years of experience to say, we want you to go out there and check this person that we're underwriting to whether or not they've got sufficient or appropriate security, so that our risk of underwriting this company or their data management or their security management is appropriate. So, you know, my advice to companies when I was a consultant and now is, get your coverage in now before it becomes too hard. Because, and as much as we know that breaches occur, then by surely, the same logic says the insurance companies are going to have to pay up some pretty big coin sometime soon.
Okay, that's good. Kat?
I think the problem with cyber insurance is people are not looking at it right. It's a safety net. I mean, we don't have car insurance so that we can crash our cars. We have car insurance in case we crash our cars.
Right.
Same goes for my house. I have house insurance, but if my kids leave the door open, then it's sort of useless. But what people don't consider with insurance is it's a cleanup afterwards. You've already lost data. You've already got damaged reputation. You already have all these other things. So it's not the solution to cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, again, is the people and the processes and the technology to protect what you have. And then when a breach happens, because we're not in an if, when a breach happens, then the cyber insurance can come in and help you to do that cleanup. But you don't want to have to do the cleanup. You don't want someone to break into your home, even if you can replace the things you've lost. You don't want that experience.
Right. That's
well,
true.
you can't replace pictures or personal effects that are unique and that you've collected over years, or family, things that were given to you by the elders and generations. Same with business. There's limitations to how much an insurance company will pay in terms of lost revenue. Right? You could reinstate your operations, but if you've been down for like 2 weeks or whatnot, Garmin was down for 5 days. I don't know if you saw that yesterday.
Yeah. We posted.
We're down 5 days.
Yeah.
So there's no amount of insurance. All insurance policies have a cap, right? So you're right, Kat. I mean, it's going to be minimal to bring you back in operations, but you won't recover from it, or at least it'll be very difficult.
So this is actually leads yet into another very interesting thing that you have all talked about, is that whether insurance is looking and asking the right questions, that, hey, what type of oversight you're providing, kind of education tools that you have. And let's look at tools. One of the things we are finding out, and I would like to hear your experience, and I think you were looking at it recently also, Chris, is companies, organizations have got ridiculous amount of tools. And I don't think they don't even understand one of them properly. Never mind, understanding 16. They can't even understand one properly. How are you going to fight this battle if you have that problem? Go for it. Since
I'll go back to my normal drive, that Kat sort of brought up too, is lists, right? Figuring out the list of the software tools, security systems, etc., that you have can be a very sobering or alarming thing. And, we all do it, in business as well as in our private lives. It's the shiny object. Oh, look, here's a shiny object. I like that. And, the vendors and the salespeople say, keep up with the Joneses is basically the gut of their sales pitch half the time, to be cynical.
Right.
And some people get seduced by that. So, my SOC manager brought up this great phrase. He said, vendor sprawl. We end up with, we got all these tools and we're not using them, or we're using them half-baked, or there's people that haven't been trained on how to use them, or the people that were trained on how to use them have left now, and now this has become an untended garden in the corner of the company. So, it gets back to get a list, find out what people are using them for, and I wouldn't be surprised in any mid to large company that inventory and those questions would result in, hey, we've got some duplication. Well, let's purge some of that, save that money, and especially in this current time. And my view is I'd rather we use 10 tools really well than 30 half-baked.
That's true. Patrick, you have something to say on this?
Yeah, I mean, and what problem are you trying to solve? And what's the value of what you're protecting, right? Those are the first questions that have to come to mind. The other thing is the silo effect. You've both mentioned in the preparation, Kat, as well, is the fact that now with cloud, with the fact line of business is also consuming services in the cloud, unbeknownst in a lot of cases to IT. We ran a few audits I remember a case where we were told to run an audit. It was a checkbox. Okay, what applications are running on our network? Not security applications as a whole, right? And some person in my staff asked, jokingly to someone of the customer, well, how many applications do you think you're running in your business? Probably 30, 40. Well, the audit came up with 250 applications, right? Most of them cloud. So you're consuming applications, you're losing control. A lot of those applications, guess how they were caught? Expense reports, monthly subscriptions, personal expenses. So then you come to a situation where you have a proliferation of this stuff, and the decision-making process being decentralized, you lose the ability to manage risk, you lose the ability to manage identity, you lose the ability to manage all this when people leave, as they will, and you forget what you're trying to solve initially, right? And sometimes it's just because IT is overwhelmed to keep the lights on, and they can't supply, they can't supply enough services line of business. And sometimes it's their fault. In other cases, it is not. It has a lot to do with corporate culture. The business has to keep running. So you're going to have line of business consuming applications, and then if you're that chief privacy officer, data officer, CISO, you don't know what wave is going to hit you, and at what time, and you're responsible for that. So, like Chris said, you need that list, but you need also to centralize the decision process on the acquisition, or not necessarily acquisition, but approval process for what you open up in your network, in your applications. Right? And the cloud applications and the data that resides there versus the data you have internally, how is it backed up? How is it accessed? When is it deleted? All these questions are exacerbated by the fact that our data is now everywhere, and we've somewhat, in a lot of organizations, lost control on who actually decides on what we buy and install.
That's right. That's right. Kat, you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. In terms of tools, I mean, one other thing that people need to be aware of is under a lot of the data privacy regulations, there's an accountability now with tools. So in order for you to be GDPR compliant, every tool you use also has to be GDPR compliant as well. And in most cases, I think Bill 64, Patrick can nod or shake his head, but you also need a vendor agreement in there as well, right? So I know LGPD coming in Brazil requires vendor agreements. So you have to have in writing that any of the tools that you're using will be compliant to the level that you're compliant, but they're also required to report breaches to you. So you need to make sure that if you're storing sensitive data, or any data really into these tools, that if there's a breach on their end, that you have some kind of agreement in place where they will come back to you with that information. And that's key in all the breach reporting.
Therein lies the problem when this comes out, right? When this is legislation in Canada. And then obviously it will be impacting all Canadian-based companies that have head offices outside of Quebec but operate in Quebec. You're right. I mean, you have to look after your suppliers, your vendors, yourself. There's going to be a lot of complexity associated with this. Obviously, there'll probably be a couple of years to comply, but as is mostly the case, you'll need a head start.
It makes things very interesting, right? In that, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
The tools thing is not trivial. I'm sure a number of you are aware, and recently there's a big lawsuit now coming up in the US about Microsoft's Graphic API. And or Graph API, and basically, the lawsuit, it's not yet proven in court, but says that component of Microsoft's O365 is sending a whole bunch of data back to head office, right? Even if they say they're not, and this happens a lot. So it's not only whether or not the tool it contains data, but is it sending it somewhere else without telling you, and that becomes a bit of a problem.
Doesn't that beg a question? We were talking about cloud earlier, which is why I keep saying we need to have a Canadian cloud, right? Is that if your data is stored in that cloud, which is let's cut through and speak plain language and say you outsource it, right? Now, your data is somewhere else. It's mostly in US, whether it's Amazon or Google or anybody else. It's under the Patriot Act law of the United States, because the law says if your data, if you're registered, the company is there. Now what happens? How is Canadian consumer or the company protected?
If I may very briefly,
yeah.
You know what? There are a lot more data centers in Canada now from the hyperscalers,
yes,
right?
Yes,
you know, and they've come a lot to Quebec. I see them, you know, AWS and Microsoft. The first places they came was here because power is cheaper in Quebec, right?
Yes,
hydroelectricity.
Yes, right.
The thing you have to validate is not necessarily, because some services, they advertise some services as being here and others there. And in some cases, there's a combination of services, especially now we're in the world of microservices, right? In containers, right. You could have parts of your application running here and the other parts running in the US. That's a level of complexity. The second level of complexity is you got to look at the networking. You know, in some cases, your workload is here, but your data flows may transit through Toronto, Montreal, and hook up into the New York interchanges and come back. Not stay there, but there's data in transit limitations. In some regulated industries, it's a factor. So you have to dig deep. And you know what? It's not an easy thing. You could ask your question. You have the right to ask the question of your hyperscaler. You know, where is data sitting? Yeah. How is it transiting? Some cases they'll share, others don't. But it's not, you know, black or white. You know, there are services more and more available, and they're doing it in Europe, right? Because of GDPR, and even more recently with the fact that the Americans were thrown out, you know, in the US, in Europe. Yeah. So they have the ability now. It's just more money on the billions of dollars they have, anyways, to spend in building data centers in Europe and Canada. So they have the capability of doing that.
Okay. Oh, that's actually very interesting. It means the Canadian companies should be highlighting that, by the way, your data is being processed here, doesn't go anywhere, so better oversight kind of can be provided, and, you know, create more jobs here.
You have to ask the right question.
Yeah, I think it goes correct. One of the things, and all of you have touched on it, is that, and the shiny objects, I think, is a result of that, is if you don't understand your own needs, what the heck are you going and asking and buying? Just because the vendor told you so? And we are seeing plenty of that, right? Chris, you just kind of talked about that. Patrick, you have talked about it. Catastrophic. Understand your own needs. Understand your life cycle of your transaction data. Where is entering? Where is flowing? Who's touching? Why? Right now, from a security standpoint, we don't even do background checks. In my experience in having dealt with the fraud problems globally for Visa is that these are the times when you can get the guys inside onto your side. We know that a lot of the security people have actually crossed flow. I'm talking about the last 12 months. They've probably been going for a long time, but they have actually managed to get them because it's very lucrative. That business doesn't stop. There may be COVID crisis for everybody else, but the guys who are doing bad things, they haven't stopped. You see the hacking is going on every day. So it means go back to basics, I think, is what you said, right?
Yeah, I mean, I find, like, I come from the architectural background, so I'm always about foundation and getting that right. But under all of these regulations, we have privacy impact analysis in Canada, and we have data protection impact analysis for GDPR. If you are starting a new service or a new product, you should be running an impact assessment on that service or product. And included in that is a data map, which you alluded to, Bashir, which is where is your data coming in? Where is it being stored? How's it being transferred? Who's accessing it? And a system map that shows all the pieces of everything that's touching your data and how are you securing it? Where is it being encrypted? And I know I've run a few companies through them, and they're always surprised at the amount of time it takes to actually get them done. Because they'll say, oh, it'll take us half a day to whip out a system map. And then 3 weeks later, they'll be like, look, we've got this 25-thing PowerPoint slide deck of all the systems we're using. So like Chris had said, it's worth taking the time, and it will not be a simple one-day affair, but it is worth taking the time to sit down and figure out all the pieces at play in your company and in your systems.
And you know what, Bashir, the other aspect, and this could be a whole day on its own, and maybe we can take this.
And we're going to do it.
DevOps. What we don't talk about is that a lot of companies today large organizations that have development shops are developing mobile apps, are developing apps that are cloud native, using containers, microservices, developing at the rate at which your apps come out on your mobile phones, which is weekly. Could you imagine the amount of security required to make sure that the application that goes out there is secure? So there's the concept of DevSecOps now, where within the development process in DevOps, you are validating the libraries, the APIs you're using, etc. But a lot of companies are rushed to market because marketing said, you know what, we need to launch this product 2 weeks from now. We have a $200 million marketing campaign. This can't be late. And if you don't integrate security in your development process at cloud speed, you're going to launch applications that will compromise your users' data, potentially, a Tim Horton type situation.
Right.
You may have wasted all the money because your application doesn't work, etc. So this is a whole other conversation, because we're talking about assets, applications that are already designed and built, but companies are designing stuff on their own. They need to develop it in a secure way. And that's something else that has to be on the radars of a lot of companies that have a development shop and that's doing DevOps and developing mobile apps.
I think that is actually fantastic. One of the problems, we've run out of time. So and you were right, by the way, it was me who screwed up because the coffee break was before, and my glasses, I need to get them changed because I saw them under. But regardless, I think what we're going to do, because there are a lot more questions here which we've kept, is that, Chris, I think what we're going to do this with all other panels, if we can do one-on-one, even if it's 45 minutes, hour, whatever, to take these questions that we have now got and answer them. So we'll put it out in the same place, right, over the next few days, as your time allows, because, you know, we're working from home. We can do it at any time that works for you, Patrick or Kat, right? Then we can do that, because I think there's a lot of meat here, what we put out there, that needs to be drilled down now. Some we have definitely covered, but I think Chris has got plenty of things. You have got, Patrick, plenty, and so does Kat. And you know, I've gone through this too many times myself. I can add 2 cents, whatever. But I think it's fantastic what you guys have done today, and I want to thank all of you for taking time to do this and to work with you again on more. So, Patrick, thanks a lot. Chris, I know with the things going on, you've been very busy. And I think, Kat, you were either away or you're somewhere else at the moment, right?
No, I'm back.
Oh, you're back? Okay, fantastic. But no, fantastic. Thanks very much. And we're to all the people who are watching, our stream continues. We are going to take a 10-minute break. 12:30, we're going with what I'm going to put up on the screen with Bob Lane. And it's something you do not want to miss, which is, can you see the screen, by the way, guys?
Yeah, restarting business.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So that is going to be where is it? Here, there we go. So I think if you guys want to grab a cup of coffee or tea or whatever and be back, we will do that as well. And big thanks to everybody for participating and putting in your very valued and thoughtful comments. And we're going to go. I know there's a lot more there, so we'll come back to that for sure.
Thank you.
Great session, guys.
Thanks
Great.
very much.
Thank you, Chris, Patrick, and Kat. That was awesome.
Thank you. Cheers.